Now you'll remember that the HTML document is divided up at a high level into a head and a body. So what we're going to look at now is the head of an HTML document in a little bit more detail. What I want to do primarily is to show you why the head element is so important. As we've seen already, the main visible part of the head element is the title sub-element, and there's more that will go in there, which is, in terms of the text that goes into it, is not immediately visible, but of course there will be implications for both the styling of your web page and the accessibility of your web page. So let's go and look at that in a little bit more detail. So let's look at our template so far. Here it is. The template is pretty minimal at the moment. We've got the doc type in there. We've talked about that a little bit. We've got the root element, HTML. We've got two sub-elements, the head, which contains metadata, and the body, which is where the marked up content of your document goes. I should say at this point that the marked up content doesn't exclusively or even required to be text. It could be with HTML5 video or audio, other media files. We'll come back to that a little bit more in the next chapter. But I wanted to get that clear at this stage. But we're going to have a look at the head now in a bit more detail. There's some more things that can go in there. The first thing we need to look at, and it's not quite in the head element, but it comes in as metadata in a sense. We can set the document's primary language, or even primary language of sub-elements of a document. It's rarely done, but it is important to do that because it will help search engines and screen readers. So remember, user agents, which are the entities that are going to access the document, are not just browsers but also search engines and screen readers. And especially if the primary language is not English, then setting the language, identifying the language you're going to use in the text of the document is important, because that will help the search engine to index the document, especially if the language is not English. And of course it'll help the screen readers identify how to present orally the content of the website. So to be 100% standards compliant, then setting the language, in our case to English, will resolve any unambiguity about the textual content, the language that's used in the textual content of the document. I'm not going to go through the details of the language codes. They're structured structured codes. You could use just straight EN for English, for example. To specialize the English, then there are a number of variants of English which could be used, and the web link there will show you how to build up the language tags. But what we're going to do as good practice is to include the language tag, the language attribute, straight from the scratch in the top level, in the root, as an attribute of the root HTML element. As it said in the last slide, if you want to, for example, include a paragraph which has got a quotation of French, say, then you could include the language tag for the language attribute as an attribute of the relevant paragraph tag, and that attribute will apply for the tag that it's an attribute of, and any subtags of that. And then we'll revert back to the higher level language once that tag is once that element is closed. So a slight revision of the template, not essential, but it's good practice to start to include that. And it keeps it in your mind that when you get especially to a part of the content of your website where you might be using or quoting a different language to the main language of your website, then include the attribute for that element with the language specifying what spoken language you're using. The next thing to think about is the character encoding. That is the internal representation of the characters that you are using in your document, and that you expect the browser to in turn use to reinterpret the coding up of your document as screen characters when it's rendering it. I'll say a lot more about that in the next chapter, in the first lecture of the next chapter. But I want to just take as read that it is important to specify the character encoding. This is not a requirement for a valid HTML document, but it is recommended practice, and of the various choices of character encodings, then UTF-8, a Unicode encoding is the recommended practice. So place that at the beginning of head. By doing that, it subverts a security issue with some versions of Internet Explorer. So if you place it early in the document, that will make sure that the browser is and your server is interpreting the document correctly. So this leads us to what I would recommend as the final, in a sense, basic version of the template. So for it to be a valid HTML document, you need a doc type, you need an HTML root tag, you need head and body, and within the head element you also must have a title. But I would also strongly recommend you to include the charset definition, the character encoded definition, as the first statement in the head element, and also to be explicit about the language which you're writing the body of your document in. Let's have a little bit more of a look at the title element. As I said, you must have a title in the head. That's the only, from an HTML perspective, that's the only required element to go within the head. Title can't contain any nested elements, so we'll see in the next lecture a little bit more about nesting elements, but a key feature of title is that it can't have any nested elements, so you can't emphasize words or embolden words within the title. This is because it's a bit pointless, because the place where the title typically appears is in the menu bar of a browser, or a screen reader will access that as the first piece of content. And there's no value at all in trying to put some styling in that. It simply won't be reflected in the menu bar. So don't contain any nested elements. Remember that it is the first piece of content that most user agents will see, and as I said, user agents include screen readers and search engines. So make sure that the title content is concise and informative. And don't try to trick search engines, because the search engines are going to use that as a first view of the content of your document, and if it's not consistent with the remainder of the content, then you will be punished. Many of the search engines, including Google, will drop the page rank of a document if there are inconsistencies between the title element and the rest of the content of the document, because they assume you're deliberately trying to trick it. So make sure it is relevant, concise, and informative. So, for example, in this particular example, we've given the name of the organization whose website we're developing, and we've also structured the title a little bit using pipes or less than or equal or semicolons, whatever you choose. Pipes show up particularly well, that's what I've used here. And what I'm indicating here is that for this particular website, the various subpages have a subtitle separated from the main title by a pipe. That's nice and succinct and easy for someone to read. So and identify whereabouts in there they are in the website from looking at the menu bar. So that's, again, good practice. If you've got a slightly more deeply structured document, you may use some of the other other separators to provide a convention for identifying subpages of subpages. So that's an example of a concise and one presumes relevant title for a particular web page. Current practice again is increasing use of there is increasing use of this. So the next thing to add into your mindset is to include in there another meta tag with a description of your website. So that has two attributes, a name and a content. The name must be description for it to be recognized by the user agents who you want to recognize this. And then again, relevant content. And the reason why that is useful is that many web browsers, including Google, will include that description underneath the reference to your website when it comes up in a search engine. So if we look at a slightly different search for real websites in Google, then we see for example this, and if you look at this particular website and you right click and view source, then you will see that there is a meta tag with that description, and as well as presenting the description to you beneath the name of the website, it will also highlight the search terms that you've used, that it's recognized, to help it pick it out. So it's going to be using that content to help in the search, but also to help you, the users themselves, to scan through the results of a web search from a search engine as a user agent and identify which ones are the most likely to be relevant to their needs. So get that right. That's a key part of optimizing for search engines nowadays. Google and Yahoo use this extensively, and more search engines are using it. The thing to avoid, and this is why partly what motivated the development of the PageRank algorithm, because at the end of the 90s people were doing just this, that they were stuffing keywords into their document to try and raise the ranking of or raise the findability of their website for all sorts of irrelevant searches. So they identified search words which were popular at the time and included those in their head elements as meta tags. And if you do something like that, again, you'll be punished. And as a result of the intensive use of keyword stuffing, then keywords are rarely used in search engines now, or have a very low influence on the rank order. However, if you use keywords sensibly, they can be useful in certain situations. Primarily when you're building a large website, then using appropriate keywords on sub-pages can be extremely useful in implementing a search facility for within your own website and also supporting navigation around the website. So keywords as in a meta tag are still useful, but primarily when you're building large websites, and you will use those in your own bespoke search facility for your own website. And if you explore most of the large-scale websites where they have a search facility, you'll be familiar with Amazon's, but most e-commerce sites have a search facility. They'll be using keywords on subpages to help users navigate to the most relevant subpage, even if the search term they're using isn't actually mentioned on the page that they end up with. So they'll use synonyms, for example, a lot of cases as keywords within subpages to make sure that if they're thinking off the top of their head, if they have a subpage which is a selection of sofas, that when someone searches the website using the keyword furniture, then it will show up the sofa subpage. So good practice there. Not used much, has very little influence because of the bad things people used to do with keyword stuffing. It doesn't have much influence on large-scale search engines, but it can. The keywords can be put to good use if you use them sensibly to support navigation or search around your own large-scale website. Those are the main things I want to cover at the moment, but there are two other categories of tag that categories of element that could go into the head, which I'll come back to in the last chapter of this course, and these are the ones which will get picked up on in more advanced courses. As I've said many times, only put what's absolutely necessary in the HTML document. That are the meta tags in the head element and the marked up content in the body element. The benefit of that is that as a result of that, you can maintain the content as a single file, and if you wish to reuse that content in different kinds of styling scenarios, then by changing a separate document, you can change the styling. Similarly, if you want to change the user interaction style, keep all the scripting for the user interactions in a separate file, and you can have the right appropriate people skill set with the appropriate skill sets maintaining that, and you have a clear document where you can modify the interaction style, and that will be reflected across a large number of subpages as appropriate according to your design. So Style sheets and scripts, JavaScript files, belong in separate files, and it's in the head element that you import those into your document. So there's some final two kinds of meta tags that go into the head element: a link for the style sheet or style sheets, depending on usage context, and a link for script or script files, which will be used for the dynamic interaction, user interaction parts. I'm not going to talk too much about those last two in this course because they will have advanced courses of their own to cover those. But be aware, this is the whole purpose of this. One of the key motivations of this particular HTML course is that the development of style sheets and scripts is a separate area of responsibility and belongs outside the HTML document.